throne room of the Red Keep holds its breath. It does this sometimes in the moments before history pivots on a single word, a single decision, a single man's willingness to abandon calculation in favor of something rawer and more dangerous than politics. The iron teeth of the throne itself seem to lean forward. The torches burn without flickering. And then Robert Baratheon enters, and the room remembers how to be afraid. He is not drunk. That is the first thing every lord and lady registers. The first thing that sends a cold ripple through the assembled court. They know this king best when wine has softened his edges, rounded the corners of his rage into something manageable and familiar. But the man who crosses the threshold of the throne room on this particular morning carries no such softening. His eyes are clear. His jaw is set with the particular density of a man who has made a decision in the dark and carried it, unbroken, into the light. He has not come to preside, he has come to act. The court falls into its instinctive silence. Cersei stands near the dais, composed as marble, her golden hair arranged with that careful perfection she wears like armor. Beside her, Joffrey shifts his weight, already sensing that something in the room has tilted against him, though he lacks the wit to name what it is. Varys is present in his customary stillness, hands folded within his robes, his face arranged into an expression of mild, unthreatening interest that reveals nothing and conceals everything. Beside him, at a distance carefully calibrated to suggest coincidence, Peter Baelish watches with eyes that are always slightly warmer than they should be, always slightly more amused, as if he alone has read the final page of a book the rest of the room is still opening. The murmuring begins when Robert speaks. Not a shout, not the bellowing fury of a king in drink. He speaks with the kind of low, grounded certainty that carries further than a shout ever could. The voice of a man who has decided that the performance of power has run its course, and that actual power must now speak for itself. He invokes the right of trial by combat. He names himself as champion. And then the room does something extraordinary. It goes quieter than it was before, which should not be possible, but happens anyway, because some declarations are so unexpected that they require a full silence to be properly absorbed. A reigning king has not personally stood as champion in a trial by combat in over 100 years. Every lord present understands this. They understand it not as historians, but as men who have staked their families and their futures on their ability to read the room, read the crown, read the currents of power that run beneath every formal proceeding, like underground water beneath stone floors. They understand that what is happening before them is not protocol, it is rupture. Cersei's composure does not crack, but it bends. The slight tightening around her eyes, the almost imperceptible adjustment of her shoulders, these are the tells that only those watching closely enough will catch. And in this room, at this moment, nearly everyone is watching closely enough. She had built this moment with patience and precision. She had placed each piece with care, and now the board has been struck by a fist that did not bother to learn the rules before overturning them. Joffrey's face does what Cersei's does not. It reveals everything. The confusion, the indignation, the flicker of something almost like fear before the practiced mask of cruelty is reassembled over the top of it. He is still a boy. That is the wound beneath all his posturing. He is still a boy, and his father is still a king, and some part of him has never entirely stopped flinching in Robert's shadow. Varys and Littlefinger exchange a glance. It lasts perhaps 2 seconds. It contains an entire conversation. Whatever its precise content, both men file it away with the efficiency of those who have learned to treat every unexpected development not as chaos, but as inventory. And then they bring Ned forward. He moves slowly, and the slowness has nothing to do with reluctance. The wound in his leg, still imperfectly healed, forces his gait into something uneven and deliberate. The chains at his wrists catch the torchlight. His beard has grown unkempt during his imprisonment, and his face carries the particular hollowness that comes from weeks of a dungeon's particular darkness. The absence of sun, of air that moves, of any sound that is not stone or silence. He looks diminished, and yet there is something in the way he carries his head, the way his eyes move through the room with assessment rather than desperation, that suggests the man underneath is still intact. He finds Robert's eyes across the length of the hall. The distance between them is perhaps 40 feet. It might as well be 20 years. It might as well be the Eyrie and 2 young men standing in the mountain cold, forging something between them that neither of them had the words for at the time, and that neither of them has entirely managed to dishonor since, even through all the long seasons of distance and disappointment. Robert holds his gaze. He does not smile. He does not gesture. He simply looks at his oldest friend across a hall full of people who would very much prefer that Ned Stark not leave it alive. And the looking itself is the declaration. Ned's chains shift as he straightens. Cersei does not wait for the hall to empty. She does not wait for the lords to finish their murmuring, for the servants to begin their tidying, for the torches to settle into their quieter evening rhythm. She is moving before Robert has finished speaking, her skirts a whisper against stone, her face arranged into something serene and unreadable for the benefit of anyone watching, which everyone always is. She has spent her entire life being watched. She has learned to perform composure the way other women learn embroidery, patiently, repetitively, until the fingers move without thought. Jaime finds her in the small solar off the eastern gallery, the one that Robert never uses, that smells faintly of old parchment and the particular neglect that settles into rooms where power does not regularly sit. She's already lit the candles herself, unwilling to wait for anyone who might listen. The door closes, the latch drops, and the face she has been wearing since the throne room falls away like a mask unbuckled. She tells him what has happened. He already knows. He was there. But she tells him anyway, because laying it out in words is how she thinks, how she has always thought. Working through a problem by constructing it aloud, building the architecture of her predicament until she can see its weak points. Robert has invoked personal combat, not trial by champion, not the ordinary mechanism of a king who wishes to be seen without wishing to bleed. Personal combat, his own body, his own hands, the specific language of a man who has either lost his political mind entirely or has found, somewhere in the wreckage of his reign, a single point of absolute conviction and decided to plant his flag in it. Either possibility is dangerous. The second is catastrophic. Jaime crosses his arms. He suggests, with the practiced calm of a man who has spent years watching her think, that the king's duty to preserve himself is not merely tradition, it is codified. A king is the realm. The realm cannot be risked on a point of personal honor. He could name a champion. The Kingsguard exists precisely for this purpose. Sir Meryn, perhaps, or Cerberus, who is large enough to be persuasive even when he is not competent enough to be dangerous. She shakes her head before he finishes. She already ran that calculation before she reached this room. Robert did not simply challenge Ned Stark to combat. He specified it. The words he used, she turns them over in her mind the way a jeweler turns a stone looking for the flaw, were deliberate, precise, the language of a man who has been advised, or who has, against all expectation, advised himself. There is no space in what he declared for a champion to step into. The loophole is not merely closed, it was never opened. And to challenge the legality of it now, before every lord currently residing in the city, before men who will carry what they witness back to their own seats of power and translate it into dinner conversation for a decade, is to make the crown look desperate. Desperate queens do not survive the things that desperate queens are driven to do. They survive only when no one can see them doing it. Jaime watches her. He does not offer another suggestion. He knows her well enough to know when she has already arrived somewhere and is only still moving because momentum requires it. She turns to the writing table in the corner of the room and touches the surface of it with her fingertips, feeling the grain of the wood. A raven, she says, and she is already composing it in her mind as the word leaves her lips. Dragonstone. There are assets there. Not loyalties exactly, but arrangements, the careful architecture of obligation that she's been building for years in the spaces between Robert's inattentions. Nothing so crude as an ally, something more useful, someone who owes her and knows it and fears what knowing it might cost them if her protection were withdrawn. She does not tell Jaime what she writes. She writes it quickly, in the particular hand she uses for correspondence. She does not wish attributed, and she seals it not with her own mark, but with nothing at all, leaving it to arrive as a thing that came from the air, from nowhere, from the general shape of someone's interests aligning with someone else's. She gives it to no one in this room. There is a boy, not a castle boy, not a boy with any allegiance to any steward or maester, who moves messages for her when she needs them, moved quietly, and he will be in the usual place at the usual hour. Then she summons Pycelle. The old man arrives with his habitual performance of frailty, the shuffling steps and the trembling hands and the watery eyes that have never once, in her experience, failed to notice exactly where in a room the most powerful person stood. He stands before her, and she looks at him for a long moment without speaking, letting the silence do the work that words would only make clumsy. If you're enjoying this alternate history of Westeros so far, please consider subscribing, because I upload new stories every single day. Now, let's continue with the story. She describes what she needs with the minimum number of words necessary to be precise. Something slow, something that blurs the edges, something that would not show in a man's face at supper, that would not ring any alarm in any watching eye, but that would find its way into his hands by morning, into the particular steadiness that Robert's hands would need to carry the weight of what he has promised, his reflexes, his timing, the small calculations of muscle and instinct that 20 years of feasting have already worn down, but not yet worn away entirely. Pycelle's eyes do not change. His hands continue their gentle trembling. He says that he understands her. He says it with the particular neutrality of a man who has understood queens before and survived the understanding and learned that survival requires a certain amnesia about one's own complicity. She dismisses him. He shuffles toward the door. She watches him go and feels not relief, not satisfaction, but the cold forward motion of a plan that has been set in motion, pieces moving on a board that no one else in the city can yet see clearly. Robert will drink his evening wine. He always does. He has never in her memory refused a cup placed before him in his own hall. But even as she turns back to the candles, even as she watches the flames stand perfectly still in the airless room, a thought arrives that she does not welcome. Robert named the combat publicly, before witnesses who are already at this moment composing letters and committing the moment to memory. If something happens to Robert before the morning, if his health declines, if his hand trembles visibly, if anyone with a physician's eye notices something amiss, the trail of suspicion does not lead into darkness. It leads, with depressing directness, here. She needs it to be subtle enough that it cannot be named, and she needs Ned Stark, even if Robert fights at half his capacity, to still face something formidable enough that the outcome is not guaranteed. Because a dead Robert who died suspiciously the night before trial by combat is one problem. A living Ned Stark walking out of the city with everything he knows is another problem entirely. And she is, at this particular moment, running out of moves that solve both at once. The candle gutters slightly, as if some draft has found its way through stone. She does not look at it. She is already thinking about the morning. The training yard behind the Tower of the Hand had been cleared before first light. Robert had seen to that himself, dismissing the usual squires and grooms with a wave that invited no argument, keeping only Barristan Selmy at his side as the gray morning settled over King's Landing like a held breath. There were no spectators. Robert had been specific about that too. Sir Barristan says nothing when Robert first takes up the practice blade. He watches with the particular stillness of a man who has watched a great many things over a great many years, and whose face has long since learned to reveal only what he chooses. What he chooses now is patience and a careful neutrality, and nothing else. Robert rolls his shoulders, finds his grip, and begins. The first thing that becomes clear is that the anger is still there. The aggression has not softened, has not been padded over by feasting and wine and years of sedentary governance. When Robert moves forward, he moves with genuine intent, his hammer strokes carrying the kind of force that does not require technique to be dangerous. Barristan parries twice, absorbs the weight of it, and gives ground with the quiet efficiency of a man who knows that giving ground is not the same as losing. He notes privately what the king does not show him: the slight catch in his breathing after the third exchange, the moment where his left knee does not quite fully extend, the way the second minute of sustained effort costs him something that the first does not. He does not say any of this. He adjusts his pressure, finds the rhythms that will sharpen rather than exhaust, and works the king through 2 full days of it, morning and late afternoon, when the heat has eased, with the steady, unhurried authority of a man who has trained better fighters than this, and worse ones. He is not trying to rebuild what 20 years of soft living have worn away. There is no time for that. He is trying to locate what remains, which is considerable, and make it reliable enough for one fight. By the second afternoon, Robert's footwork has steadied. His combinations are shorter, more economical, stripped of the showmanship that crept in during the early sessions. Baratheon gives a small nod when Robert lands a clean sequence, and Robert catches it, and something in his face sharpens with a satisfaction that does not belong to a king reviewing progress. It belongs to a younger man remembering something he had only half forgotten. That night, Robert goes to Ned. The black cells have not held him for 2 days. The formalities of trial procedure, ancient and largely symbolic, but nonetheless real, require that a man facing trial by combat be moved to conditions less deliberately degrading. Ned's new quarters are modest but clean. A real bed, a real window with its small rectangle of star-dark sky, a candle rather than a torch. He is sitting on the edge of the bed when the door opens, and he does not look surprised to see who it is. He looks tired and thinner than he should be, and like a man who has had considerable time alone with his own thoughts and found the company mixed. Robert sits down heavily on the room's single chair, and for a long moment, neither of them speaks. What passes between them in that silence is not comfortable, but it is honest. It has the texture of something that has been accumulating for a very long time. Robert speaks first. He says that he never believed it. He says this plainly, without preamble or ceremony, as though he is stating a fact he has grown tired of refusing to say aloud. He never believed the treason charge. He says that he knows how it looked, that he knows what choices he made and did not make in those first dark days, and that he is not asking for absolution. He is simply telling him he never believed it. Ned looks at him for a moment. Then he says he knows, and then he tells him why Jon Arryn died. Robert listens. He does not interrupt. He sits with the absolute, preternatural stillness of a man who has decided that he will hear everything before he reacts to any of it, which is not a thing that has always come naturally to him. Ned speaks carefully, not because he is editing, but because the words are large and the room is small, and some of what he is saying has never been spoken aloud to anyone who mattered. He tells him what Jon found. He tells him what the Book of Lineages meant. He tells him what the children mean. Robert's face moves through several things in succession. Disbelief arrives first, wearing the expression of a man who has been struck somewhere he did not anticipate. Then something grief-adjacent, rawer, and less dignified, which he masters quickly and without apparent effort. Then the cold fury settles in. Not the hot kind, not the fury of a man who shouts and throws things. The cold kind, which is quieter and far more durable, which settles into the bones and does not dissipate. He sits with it. The silence stretches to a minute, then longer. He is looking at nothing in particular, the middle distance, or perhaps something further than that. Then he says, quietly, that he will fight tomorrow, and that afterward, things will change. He says it the way a man says something he has already fully decided, where the deciding is the last step of a process that is already finished without him quite noticing. He stands. He moves toward the door. His hand finds the frame, and he pauses there, not turning back, not quite leaving. There's something else in the room that has not finished existing yet, and both of them can feel it. The morning comes in gray and slow, the way mornings do when the city already knows what the day carries. King's Landing does not sleep cleanly on the eve of spectacle, and the eve of a king's combat is no ordinary spectacle. By the time the first light touches the domes of the great sept of Baelor, the plaza is already filling. The small folk arriving in clusters and then in crowds, pressing toward the roped barriers, finding vantage on steps and walls and each other's shoulders. They have come because they cannot not come. Because this is the kind of thing that happens once in a generation, if that, and the city's long memory already knows it. The court arrives in controlled procession, lords and ladies arranged according to rank and alliance, the seating in the royal enclosure organized with the precision of people who understand that where you sit is a statement you are making. Joffrey takes his place in the royal box and looks out at the crowd with an expression that is trying very hard to be imperious and achieving something closer to pale. Cersei sits beside him, her hands folded, her face composed into a mask so complete that it has become its own kind of expression. The total stillness of a woman containing something large and very dangerous, holding it through the pure discipline of will. She does not look at the plaza. She looks at a point slightly above it, as if she is watching a different scene entirely, one playing out in her own careful mind. Sansa Stark stands among the crowd with Septa Mordane close beside her, close enough to be a comfort, and close enough to be a cage. Sansa's face is the face of a girl who has been told that this will end well and cannot quite make herself believe it. Not entirely, not yet. She watches the empty combat ground, and she holds the belief very carefully, the way you carry something fragile over uncertain terrain, concentrating on the weight of it, and not on the distance still to cross. Then Robert enters the plaza. He enters in armor that has not seen actual use in years, and there is something in the way he wears it that is not comfortable and is not pretending to be. The weight of it sits on him differently than it once did. The years of feasting and wine have reshaped the body beneath it, broadened certain things and softened others, and the armor is honest about this in the way that metal is honest about everything. But he carries the warhammer with an ease that is immediate and unthinking, the ease of a man returning to his native language after years of speaking a tongue he never loved. The hammer knows his hand knows the hammer. Whatever else the years have taken, they have not taken that. Sir Vardis Crane takes his position opposite, a capable man, a trained man, a man with a shield and a sword, and the understanding that his task is to survive rather than to win. You do not need to beat a king in trial by combat. You need only to outlast him, to let the body's betrayals do their work, to be standing when the other man is not. It is a strategy that depends entirely on the king being the lesser fighter, on time and flesh and aging, doing what no direct challenge could accomplish. This is Vardis Crane's calculation. It is not an unreasonable one, but calculations require correct inputs. The combat opens without ceremony, as these things do when both men understand that ceremony is finished and the real language has begun. Robert moves first, and Robert moves hard, the warhammer swinging in arcs that reset the geometry of the space between them, forcing Vardis backward and then sideways, and then backward again before any particular rhythm can establish itself. The shield takes the first blow and the second, the impacts resonating through the crowd as something felt rather than simply heard, a vibration in the chest, a reminder of what metal and force mean at proximity. Vardis circles and waits and manages, his sword finding angles when they open, and one such angle opens in the fourth exchange. A quick, clean movement that draws blood from the king's upper arm, a shallow cut, but a real one, and the crowd shifts like a single breathing thing in response. Robert does not stop. Robert barely seems to register it. This is the thing that Pycel's slow draft, measured and administered in the wine the evening prior, has failed to account for. It has slowed Robert slightly, yes, has laid a thin gauze over the sharpest edge of his reflexes, has made certain adjustments marginally heavier. But it has not accounted for what the fight itself is doing to the man, because the fight is burning something off. The years of indolence, the accumulated softness, the grief and the boredom, and the long, slow wasting of a warrior denied his purpose. The hammer burns through all of it, and what is left underneath is older and simpler and considerably less forgiving. Barristan had drilled him in the pre-dawn dark for 3 weeks. Robert had complained through most of it and absorbed all of it, because the body remembers what the mind pretends to have forgotten. The body has no politics, no nostalgia, no patience for comfortable lies. The body knows what it was built to do. Vardis makes his error in the 8th minute. He steps to his right when the pattern of the fight has established that stepping right is the thing Robert is waiting for. It is a small error, the kind invisible, except in retrospect. Robert's weight is already moving when the step happens, and the war hammer does not so much swing as arrive. The word for it is inevitable, a word that applies to certain physical events the same way it applies to certain political ones. The blow connects at the top of the shield and the edge of the shoulder behind it. Vardis Crane goes down. He does not get up. Robert stands over him, breathing in the ragged, effortful way of a man who has run a great distance through difficult country. His chest working hard, his arm bleeding steadily from the cut that has not stopped. The crowd's eruption comes all at once, massive and disorganized. The sound of thousands of people releasing something they had been holding tightly without knowing it. Joffrey has gone very still in his box in a way that is not composure. Cersei has looked away, finally, the controlled gaze having found somewhere else to be, something else to consider. The ancient words are spoken by the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, formal and clear in the sudden lessening of the crowd's noise. The words that the law requires and the law honors when they are spoken above a combat that has concluded. Trial by combat, lawfully met, lawfully decided. The gods have spoken in the only language they are sometimes asked to use. The chains on Eddard Stark's wrists are struck by command of the king himself. Robert still standing in the plaza with the hammer at his side and the blood running down his forearm, and the expression of a man who is not yet finished with what this day is going to require of him. The striking of the chains is a sound the city will remember, a small sound, metallic and final, almost lost in the noise surrounding it. But Sansa Stark hears it from where she stands, and something in her face changes. Not relief exactly. Not yet. Relief belonging to a future that is not quite solid yet. Something earlier than relief. The precondition of it. Her father's hands are free. The guards move to escort Ned toward the royal enclosure, and Robert is turning now. Turning toward his small council members clustered at the edge of the combat ground, and there is a conversation happening in the set of his jaw that has not yet found its words. Varys stands slightly apart from the others, his hands folded within his sleeves, watching the king with the particular attention of a man cataloging a development that changes several things at once. Littlefinger is beside him, and his expression carries something that might be reassessment, the rapid internal revision of a man whose projected scenario has just encountered an unexpected outcome. Robert raises his voice and calls for Ned to be brought to him, and the command carries the weight of a man who has just proven something and knows it, and the knowledge is not comfortable, not triumphant, but it is certain. He is bleeding in the plaza before the great sept of Baelor, and he is the king, and Ned Stark is walking toward him with unchained hands, and somewhere behind Robert's eyes, the cold fury from the night before has not diminished. It has, if anything, been clarified, sharpened by exertion into something more precise. The things he said the night before, standing in the doorway, that afterward things will change. Those words are about to find their meaning. The dawn comes gray and cold over King's Landing, the kind of morning that feels provisional, as though the city itself is waiting to learn what it has become overnight. The torches along the Red Keep's corridors have burned low, and the servants who move through the halls do so quietly, sensing without being told that the atmosphere of the place has shifted in some fundamental way. There is no celebration. There is only the particular hush that follows a violent thing, the silence that settles into the spaces where loud certainties used to live. Robert does not sleep. He has the mester clean and dress the wound across his ribs, and he sits through it without complaint, without whine, his eyes fixed on the middle distance, while the needle does its work. Those who see him in the earliest hours of that morning note the same thing independently of one another, that he looks older and also somehow more present than he has been in years. The softness that wine and feasting had layered over him like sediment has been scraped back by the night's exertion, and what remains underneath is something harder and less comfortable. A man remembering what he was built for. He calls the small council at dawn, not at a reasonable hour, not after breakfast, but at dawn, and the summons carries enough urgency that none of them dare make him wait. They come in various states of dishevelment, Varys characteristically composed, Littlefinger watchful, Grand Meister Pycelle moving with his familiar theatrical infirmity. Robert is already seated when they arrive. He does not rise. He is bleeding faintly through the fresh linen at his ribs, and he gives no indication that this concerns him. The matter of Janos Slynt he dispenses with first, and he does so without preamble or excessive explanation. Ned, before his arrest, had compiled evidence of Slynt's corruption with the methodical thoroughness of a man who understood that evidence is armor, that in a court built on performance and patronage, documented truth is one of the few currencies that cannot be easily counterfeited. That evidence had survived the chaos of his imprisonment, and Robert has had it in his hands since before the sun rose. He reads none of it aloud. He does not need to. He names what is in it, briefly and with precision, and then he states that Slynt is to be removed from command of the city watch, arrested, and held pending a full accounting of his conduct and the sources of his various financial arrangements. The order is given flatly, without theater. The small council members make no objection. Littlefinger's expression does something complicated and then settles. He had invested in Slynt as a reliable instrument. That investment has just been voided. The meeting is brief. Robert dismisses them with the air of a man who has more significant business waiting and does not intend to spend his limited patience on the preliminary matters. He is right that more significant business is waiting. It is waiting in the Tower of the Hand, where Ned Stark is being tended by a Meister, his body paying the accumulated debt of weeks of captivity in the black cells. And it is waiting, of a different kind, in Cersei's chambers. He goes to Cersei's chambers first. This is deliberate. He goes there while he still has the morning's cold clarity around him, before the day can introduce complications, before anyone can counsel him toward a more measured approach. He knocks once and then enters without waiting, which is itself a statement about how thoroughly the architecture of their marriage has shifted in a single night. She is awake. She has been awake, it seems, for some time, dressed already, composed in the particular way of someone who has spent hours in preparation for exactly this confrontation. She watches him cross the room without retreating, without softening. Whatever else might be said of Cersei Lannister, she does not flinch. Robert has always known this about her. It has never made him love her, but he has never entirely failed to respect it. He does not shout. This is perhaps the thing that unnerves her most, that he does not shout, does not reach for the furniture or the walls, does not perform his anger in any of the ways she has learned to anticipate and therefore manage. He stands in the middle of her chamber, and he tells her what he knows. He says the name Jaime with the specific flatness of a man who has rehearsed the word until all the violence has been pressed out of it, leaving only fact. He tells her that Joffrey will not be crowned. He tells her that she will remain in her chambers under guard while he decides how to proceed, and that the guard is for her safety as much as for his own arrangements. Though he says this last part without any particular effort to make it sound kind, he is not being kind. He is being precise. Cersei says several things. She is controlled and devastating, and she makes arguments that are not without logic. She invokes her children, the younger ones, Myrcella and Tommen, whose situations are genuinely complex, genuinely concerning, and she is not wrong to raise them. Robert listens. He does not argue with her. When she is finished, he tells her that he intends to see that Myrcella and Tommen are treated fairly, that what they are is not a thing they chose, and that his anger does not extend to them. He says it in a tone that suggests he means it, but has not yet worked out the details of how it will be managed. He is a man making a promise ahead of his own planning, and he knows it. He leaves her there with 2 guards at her door, and the knowledge of his anger sitting in the room with her like a third presence, and he walks the corridors toward where Ned is recovering, with the look of a man carrying more weight than any single morning should reasonably ask of a person. Ned is propped against pillows, pale and thinner than Robert has seen him since the rebellion, the kind of thinness that speaks of weeks rather than days. The master has done what he can. There is food on a table nearby that has been eaten, which is encouraging. When Robert enters, Ned looks at him with eyes that are alert in a way that suggests he has also not slept, that he has been lying there in the early hours, cataloging contingencies with the same patient discipline he brings to everything. Robert sits. He does not speak for a moment. The silence between them is the silence of men who have known each other long enough that silence has its own grammar between them. Ned speaks first, and what he says is not what Robert expects. He does not thank him. He does not speak of the morning's relief, or the night's outcome, or what it meant to have unchained hands again. He says, directly and without softening, that Jaime Lannister is in the field, that Tywin Lannister's armies are a force that cannot be dismissed, and that moving against Cersei publicly, moving against the Lannister name in any definitive way, before alliances are secured and support consolidated, risks the kind of military response that the realm cannot presently absorb. He is not arguing for mercy. Robert understands this clearly. Ned Stark is not built for mercy as a strategic instrument. He is arguing for patience. He is arguing that the right outcome achieved too quickly, without the proper foundations, becomes the wrong outcome by the time the consequences arrive. Robert listens to all of this with his hands folded, his eyes on Ned's face. And when Ned is finished, Robert says nothing for a long moment. Then he asks quietly, which of the great houses Ned believes could be moved to support the crown's position if the truth about Joffrey's parentage were made known through the proper channels, carefully before any public declaration? Ned considers this. He names the Tyrells as uncertain, but potentially persuadable. They had their own ambitions regarding the Iron Throne, and their own grievances with Lannister influence at court. He names the Arryns, though he says it with a heaviness that carries its own complicated weight. He names the Starks, which goes without saying, and the Tullys, whose loyalty to him creates its own leverage. Robert listens to the list, and then he nods, once slowly, with the expression of a man doing arithmetic that he does not particularly enjoy, but cannot afford to get wrong. He stands and he looks down at Ned, and he says that he will need him recovered as quickly as possible, that there are letters to be drafted, and there is a small council to be rebuilt, and that the position of Hand of the King remains his if he still has the stomach for it. Ned does not answer immediately. He looks at Robert with an expression that is measuring something. Not Robert's sincerity, which he does not doubt, but the full weight of what being Hand means in the current situation, what it will require, what it will cost. The answer is not a simple thing, and they both know it. Outside the chamber's narrow window, King's Landing is beginning to move through its morning, the city going about its commerce and its gossip, most of its inhabitants unaware that the arrangement they have been living inside has cracked clean through in the night. A raven arrives somewhere in the upper towers, the sound of its wings audible even here, and both men register it in the same moment, both aware that somewhere beyond the city's walls, the consequences of last night are already beginning their outward journey, carrying news toward people who will receive it and begin to calculate their own next moves. Ned's answer is forming behind his eyes. Before it reaches his mouth, a knock comes at the chamber door. The knock does not open into Ned's answer. It opens into something else entirely. The messenger is young, barely old enough to shave, and he carries the kind of stillness that comes not from calm, but from having ridden hard through the night with news he does not fully understand. He speaks it plainly because that is all he knows how to do. Jaime Lannister, he says, rode for the city before dawn with 100 men at his back. The Kingslayer is at the gate. Robert looks at Ned. Ned looks at Robert. Neither man speaks, because in this moment there is nothing to say that the other has not already thought. What the messenger does not know, what Jaime himself perhaps does not fully know, is that this ride began the moment word left King's Landing. Not a raven this time. A rider sent by someone within the Red Keep, who understood that if Cersei was confined and Robert was alive, the situation required intervention before it calcified into something permanent. The rider reached Jaime's camp while the city was still dark. Jaime read the message by torchlight, and before the flame had fully taken the parchment, he was already calling for his horse. This is the calculation that drives him south. Cersei is not dead. That matters. Robert is not pressing charges of treason, not yet. That matters more. There is still a window, narrow, closing, in which the sight of 100 Lannister swords at the city's gate might remind Robert Baratheon what the cost of this conflict could become. Remind him that the Lannisters are not a family one, corners without consequence. This is what Jaime tells himself as the miles dissolve beneath his horse. This is the story he is composing as he rides, revising it with every league, trying to find a version in which he arrives and Cersei is freed, and the whole business ends here rather than expanding outward into something catastrophic. He does not finish that story. He does not get the chance. Sir Barristan Selmy is waiting at the mud gate with 200 men and a document bearing the king's seal. The two knights regard each other across a distance of perhaps 40 yards, the width of a city's welcome or refusal, as the moment decides. Barristan does not draw his sword. He does not need to. He has not drawn his sword because drawing it would suggest uncertainty, and Barristan Selmy is not uncertain. He is a man who has spent his entire life learning the difference between a battle worth fighting and a battle that can only be lost, and he has learned it so thoroughly that the knowledge lives in his posture now, in the way he sits his horse without shifting, in the way his eyes hold Jaime's across the gate's stone shadow. Jaime counts. He cannot help it. 100 against 200, and those 200 hold the ground, hold the gate, hold the king's writ in a hand that does not tremble. He counts further, past the arithmetic of the moment and into the arithmetic of consequence. Cersei, inside the city. The children, inside the city. And on the other side of this standoff, Robert Baratheon, still alive, still crowned, his legal authority intact, and his patience for Lannister presumption, Jaime suspects, quite thoroughly exhausted. There is a version of this moment in which Jaime rides forward. He has rehearsed it. He knows how his sword comes free, knows the angle, knows the men around Barristan who would need to be dealt with in the first 6 seconds before anything could be reorganized. He knows he could reach the old knight. What he also knows, what he cannot argue himself past, is what comes after. Not the battle, the verdict. Because riding through a royal garrison to free a woman charged under the king's authority is not a rescue, it is a declaration. And declarations of that kind do not end with negotiations. They end with trials, and not the kind where the accused walks away. Cersei would die. The children, his children, would be hostages at best, and at worst, something he cannot let his mind touch directly. Robert would finally have the legal architecture to bring the entire Lannister house to account, and there would be nothing Tywin could say from Casterly Rock that would matter, because the offense would be written in blood spilled on the king's own streets. Jaime Lannister is many things, and not all of them are admirable. But he is not a fool. His sword stays in its scabbard. The ride into custody is the longest he has ever taken. They bring him before Robert in the throne room, and Robert does not speak immediately. He looks at Jaime the way a man looks at a piece of ground he is deciding whether to build on or burn, slowly, with the weight of something that has been carried a long time. When he finally speaks, his voice is measured in a way that is almost more unsettling than anger. The White Sword Tower, he says, until a full accounting can be made. Jaime says nothing. He understands the mercy in it, and hates understanding it, and hates more that Robert knows he understands. What no one in the throne room says aloud is what this moment has just made visible. The crown still holds, and Ned Stark, still in that chamber above the city with an unanswered question behind his eyes, is running out of reasons not to answer it. The ravens go out before the city fully wakes. That is how it is done. Not with ceremony, not with the public weight of proclamations read from steps. The real work of kingdoms travels on wings in the dark, before most men have opened their eyes to understand what the day will ask of them. Ned writes the letters himself. His hand is steadier than it has any right to be, given everything the last weeks have cost him. But there is something in the act of writing to Catelyn that settles him. The scratch of quill across parchment, the familiar shape of words meant only for her. He tells her he is alive. He tells her he is free, or nearly free, which is a distinction that still requires definition, but not urgency. He tells her that the man she took from the road, Tyrion Lannister, youngest son of Tywin, who rode into her custody through no wisdom of his own, must be released. This last part he writes carefully, not as a command, as a necessity whose logic she will understand, because Catelyn has always understood necessity, even when she hated it. Robert has asked for this. Robert, who carries the memory of a different world in his fists and his voice, and the particular way he looks at men he has decided to trust again, has asked specifically and without ambiguity. The Lannister armies have not moved yet. To keep Tyrion is to give them a reason to. The letter to Lysa Arryn is shorter and harder. There is no softness to be offered there, no warmth that would not feel like a lie. Lysa has sealed herself into the airy, like a woman barricading against a flood, convinced that every current running through the realm is aimed directly at her door. Ned writes to her with the flat clarity of someone who has run out of patience for fear that has curdled into something self-serving. Stand down. Open the mountain passes. The threat you imagined has not materialized, and the one you helped create by your silence is old enough now to be named and addressed. He does not know if she will listen. He sends the raven anyway, because the alternative is to do nothing, and Ned Stark has never in his life known how to do nothing when something needed to be done. Far to the west, in the halls of Casterly Rock, where the fires burn long and the silence is the kind that has been cultivated over decades into something almost architectural, Tywin Lannister reads 2 letters. He reads the first one standing. It is Cersei's, written days ago, dispatched in the window when she still believed the outcome was controllable, still believed that the machinery she had set into motion would produce the result she had designed. The letter describes Ned Stark's situation in terms of trajectory. A man heading toward ruin. A hand whose days are numbered. Tywin sets it aside with the particular stillness of a man who has learned that his stillness communicates more than most men's words. Then he reads the second, which bears the king's seal, and he does not move for a long time. The exoneration, the trial, the sword that was supposed to fall and did not fall. He sits with these facts the way a builder sits with unexpected ground, measuring, recalculating, unwilling to commit a single motion until the new reality has been fully surveyed. He stares into the fire for the better part of an evening. The flames do not give him counsel. They rarely do. But they hold his attention while his mind goes to work on the only question that has ever truly interested him. What can be salvaged, and at what cost, and with what patience? Open war against Robert Baratheon is unwinnable. Not because Robert is clever. Tywin has never confused energy with intelligence, but because Robert is loved in the particular way that makes men irrational on behalf of the object of their affection. An army that fights for love fights longer than an army that fights for wages. Tywin knows this. He has always known this. In the morning, without explanation, without ceremony, he orders his host to stand down. His bannermen receive the command with visible confusion and invisible relief. He offers them neither acknowledgement. The order is given. The order is followed. That is sufficient. The news travels differently across the narrow sea. It arrives not through the King's Post or the Maester's networks, but through quieter channels, the kind of channels that do not exist on any map and are never acknowledged by the men who use them. Illyrio Mopatis receives it in Pentos, in a room that smells of incense and calculation, and he reads it twice. The Baratheon-Stark rupture that was supposed to crack the realm open like a fault line has not occurred. The fracture that Viserys Targaryen was counting on, that particular gap between a king's anger and a great lord's pride, that widening space where chaos could take root and grow into something that looked like opportunity, has been sealed. Not permanently, perhaps, but sealed for now, which is the only tense that matters in the short architecture of Viserys's plans. Illyrio sets the letter down and looks out at the harbor, where the water moves in its indifferent way, carrying ships toward horizons that do not care about the ambitions of men. The Dothraki crossing was always contingent on instability, contingent on a Seven Kingdoms too distracted by its own internal bleeding to notice a storm gathering beyond the narrow sea, but a unified realm, even a reluctantly unified one, even one held together by the stubborn gravity of a king who should perhaps have died and didn't, is a different kind of obstacle entirely. Across the city, in a house that Illyrio has provided and Viserys has never quite made his own, a young woman with silver hair sits beside an open window and watches the evening light fall across a city that is not hers. She does not know yet what the letter contains, but the Khaleesi has learned, in these months of dust and movement and her brother's escalating need, to read the texture of waiting, and something in the air tonight feels different. Something has shifted somewhere far away in a language she cannot yet speak, but has begun, without meaning to understand. The city sleeps in uneasy layers beneath the Red Keep, and at its apex, Robert Baratheon sits at a table with nothing on it but maps and wine he has not touched. This is the detail worth holding. The wine he has not touched. There is a cup there full, because servants do not yet know what to do with a king who does not drink, and so they fill it out of reflex and prayer. Robert stares at it sometimes the way a man stares at a wound that is closed without festering, suspicious of the healing, waiting for the rot to reveal itself. But it does not. He is clear-eyed, and the clarity is its own kind of punishment, because what he sees now is the full weight of what he built, or failed to build, sitting square upon a throne he took in fury and held through distraction. Ned Stark stands near the window. He has made a habit of standing near windows, of keeping stone walls at his back and open sky before him, as though the north in him demands at least the illusion of distance, of room to breathe. Between them, the maps. And between them, beneath the maps, the problem that has no comfortable solution. Joffrey cannot inherit. They have both known this for longer than either has spoken it plainly, but plain speech is what this moment requires, and so it has been spoken. The boy who sits at tourneys with his mother's hand on his shoulder and his grandfather's coldness behind his eyes. That boy carries Lannister blood, and only Lannister blood, and a throne passed to him is a throne surrendered to a house that has been maneuvering toward this exact arrangement since the moment Cersei Lannister first rode into King's Landing in a wedding gown. The girl Myrcella, sweet-faced and quiet. The boy Tommen, gentle in the way that courts teach children to be gentle when survival depends on giving offense to no one. Both of them the same. Both of them Jaime's. The mathematics of it are simple and brutal, which is to say they are the kind of mathematics Robert has always preferred to avoid. This leaves brothers. Stannis arrives 3 days after the Raven reaches Dragonstone, which is to say, he rides the moment the ink is dry, because Stannis has been waiting for this summons the way a sword waits inside a scabbard, perfectly still, perfectly ready, aware of exactly what it is for. He enters the small council chamber without ceremony, because Stannis does not perform ceremony unless law demands it. And even then his performance is a thing of teeth and obligation rather than warmth. He is gaunt in the shoulders and deliberate in the eyes, and he lays his arguments before Robert the way a mason lays stones, each one level, each one fitted precisely to the next, no decoration, no gap. Robert lets him speak. This is its own remarkable thing. Robert, who has always experienced Stannis the way one experiences a tax assessment, with a low and personal resentment, sits and listens to the full legal architecture of Stannis's claim and says nothing to interrupt it. The right of succession by birth, the duties of a lord to a lawful king, the precedents, the texts, the reasoned and systematic dismantling of every alternative. Stannis is not asking. Stannis has never needed to ask for what is simply, by every law the realm acknowledges, his. He is presenting. He is laying the stones. Robert, when the silence finally opens, says only, "You're right." And the words cost him something visible, not because he resents their truth, but because giving them to Stannis, of all people, feels like a particular kind of irony the gods have arranged for their own amusement. He does not say he loves his brother. He does not say he trusts him, but he acknowledges the rightness of the claim with the grudging precision of a man who has decided at last that correctness matters more than comfort. Stannis receives this with no warmth and no performance of gratitude. He nods once, a small movement, the motion of a piece settling into its proper square. They understand each other, after a fashion. Not with affection, never with affection, but with a cold mutual recognition that they are both built from rigid material, and that rigidity, however joyless, is what the realm now requires. Renly is a different calculation entirely. Renly does not attend this meeting. Renly is attending a different kind of meeting in gardens and feast halls and the company of people who love his smile, building the kind of soft influence that accumulates not through legal argument, but through the steady accrual of being liked. Robert knows what Renly is doing. He has always known, the way you know about a debt you have not yet been called to pay. Renly is charming in the way Robert once was, before grief and grief's companions had their way with him, and charm in the wrong hands is its own form of claim-making. This problem does not resolve itself in this room or in this evening. Stannis is named, not yet formally, but named between two men who matter enough that the naming has weight. And Renly is left in his gardens to go on smiling, which is perhaps the most dangerous place to leave him. The evening stretches. Stannis is dismissed with the cool efficiency of a man excusing himself from a contract signing. And when the chamber empties, It is only Ned who remains, turning from his window to face Robert across the width of a room that suddenly feels smaller. There is something in Ned's posture, a preparation, a gathering, the way a man draws breath before a thing that cannot be unsaid. Robert looks at him. "Say it," and Ned says it. He speaks slowly, choosing every word with the care of a man who has carried this specific silence for nearly 15 years and understands that the setting down of it will change the shape of things permanently. Jon Snow is not his, has never been his, not by blood. Lyanna bore the boy. Lyanna, who Robert has kept preserved in amber all these years, the woman he loved and lost and built a war around, the North Star of his grief. Rhaegar Targaryen is the father, the Dragon Prince, the man Robert shattered with a warhammer at the Trident and believed in the killing he had ended. Robert's face does its work in silence. The color changes. The darkening that begins at the jaw and moves through the eyes, the old rage rising like something with deep roots. He says nothing for a long time, long enough that the candles register the silence by burning lower. Then something loosens. It is not forgiveness. Robert Baratheon does not forgive Rhaegar Targaryen, cannot, will not, the wound being the kind that closes around its own blade. But what shifts in him is something more complicated than anger. It is the slow recognition that Lyanna chose, in whatever measure a woman of her time and circumstances could choose, and that the boy she protected with her last breath is not an insult, but a remnant, the last piece of her, hidden in the north, raised honest and hardworking, and sword-calloused under a name that was a mercy and a lie. Robert is quiet with this. He weighs it in that new way of his, sober, methodical, pained. He agrees to keep it buried, not because he loves the secret, but because he can see the board clearly enough now to know what happens if the secret walks. Another claimant, another banner, another war inside a kingdom that has only just found the bruised and provisional edges of its own peace. Jon Snow stays Jon Snow, and what Lyanna whispered in her last hours stays in the room where it has always been, sealed between two men who loved her in entirely different ways and have never until this moment spoken her name in the same breath. Ned exhales. It is the exhale of a man setting down a stone he has carried so long he had forgotten it was stone, had begun to believe it was simply part of the shape of him. Robert reaches for the wine. His hand hovers over the cup for a long moment, then he pushes it aside and stands, moving toward the window himself, so that for once it is Robert looking out at the city below, the lights of King's Landing scattered across the dark like a problem that has been partially solved and remains entirely dangerous. He should be trained, Robert says, properly. Whatever he is, he should know how to fight. He does not finish the thought. He does not need to. The letter arrives from Casterly Rock before Tyrion does, which is perhaps the only time in recorded memory that Tywin Lannister's correspondence has preceded his son anywhere. It is written in a hand so controlled it might have been carved rather than inked, each stroke the product of a man who has spent decades communicating authority through the simple act of holding a quill. The words are measured, formal, entirely devoid of the volcanic fury that those who know Tywin Lannister might have expected to find there. And it is precisely that absence, that cold architectural restraint, that tells Ned everything he needs to know about how dangerous the coming days will be. The settlement had not been easy to construct. Nothing involving the Lannisters ever is. Ned had spent 3 days in the small council chamber, with Varys listening from his corners, with Grand Maester Pycelle shifting his robes and offering nothing of use, with Robert moving between moods the way weather moves across the narrow sea, sudden, unpredictable, capable of reversing without warning. What Ned had built in those 3 days was less a legal document than a negotiated truce dressed in the formal language of justice, and he had known while building it that it would satisfy no one completely, which is the only reliable sign that a compromise has any chance of holding. Cersei would not hang. The decision had cost Robert something visible, some portion of his pride that he had worn openly like a wound in the first raw hours after the trial. But Ned had pressed the argument carefully, methodically, returning to it each time Robert's anger softened enough to allow reason back into the room. An execution would not end the Lannister question. It would ignite it. The Westerlands would not sit behind their stone and their gold and mourn quietly. They would mobilize, and the mobilization would have a justification that every lord in every keep, from Lannisport to the Eastern Hills, would understand in his bones. Because whatever Cersei had done, whatever she had allowed or engineered or permitted through her silence, she was still a Lannister, and the Lannisters had not built their house on the principle of accepting humiliation from Iron Thrones or any other source. Ned had laid this out not as sympathy for Cersei, but as arithmetic. Robert, who had never much liked arithmetic, had heard it anyway. So the terms took shape. Cersei would be stripped of her queenship, formally and publicly, the ceremony recorded and witnessed by lords of sufficient standing that no one could later claim the record was uncertain. She would be confined to Casterly Rock, not imprisoned in the dungeon sense, not chained or degraded beyond what the stripping of her title already entailed, but confined nonetheless, absent from court, absent from the capital, removed from the proximity to power that had made her dangerous. Her children's safety was guaranteed explicitly, written into the settlement with language that left no room for creative interpretation, because Ned had understood, had always understood, that Cersei's children were the only thing she had ever truly wanted to protect, and any settlement that left that safety ambiguous would produce in her exactly the kind of desperate, cornered recklessness that this entire sequence of events had been trying to prevent from the beginning. It is into this carefully constructed architecture that Tyrion Lannister arrives, smaller than the moment, and somehow larger than the room, moving through the corridors of the Red Keep with the particular gait of a man who has been underestimated in every hallway he has ever walked and has made a private study of the fact. He comes without fanfare, without armed escort, with nothing but a traveling cloak still dusty from the road, and an expression of such perfect, calibrated neutrality that it might have been rehearsed in a mirror for the journey. He had been released by Catelyn Stark through channels that Ned had quietly arranged. A negotiation within a negotiation. A door opened without ceremony, because ceremony would have required someone to admit that the door had ever been closed. Robert receives him in the solar rather than the throne room, which is itself a statement about what this meeting is. A conversation between men who need something from each other, rather than a formal presentation of power and submission. Ned stands to Robert's right, which is his customary position, and also, in this context, a signal to Tyrion about where the weight of the room actually rests. Tyrion sees it. Of course he sees it. his eyes, sharp as anything his father ever produced, move between the two of them with the quiet efficiency of a man reading a map he has largely already memorized. "My sister," Tyrion says, before Robert can speak. Not a question. Not quite. "We'll live," Robert says, "and stay in the West." Tyrion absorbs this the way he absorbs most things, without visible relief, without visible grief, with only the slight adjustment of posture that suggests an internal calculation has just updated its figures. He had expected worse, perhaps, or he had expected better and prepared himself for worse, which is the Lannister method. The doctrine Tywin had pressed into all of them through years of cold and precise instruction, though it had taken differently in each child. What follows is not quite an interrogation and not quite a confession. It is something more delicate than either. A guided conversation in which Tyrion confirms in terms careful enough to be deniable and specific enough to satisfy the legal record. Ned is quietly assembling the broad architecture of what Cersei had known and when she had known it. He does not volunteer more than is necessary. He does not perform contrition. What he offers instead is accuracy, delivered with the flat precision of a man who has decided that the truth, shaped correctly, is the most useful tool available to him in this particular moment. Ned listens. He had expected Tyrion to deflect, to dance, to spend the conversation turning questions into other questions, the way the imp was known to do in less serious circumstances. Instead, what he finds is a man who has apparently decided, somewhere on the road between the Vale and King's Landing, that the era of Lannister maneuvering through fog has produced diminishing returns, and that there may be something to be said, strategically, for the rare and unsettling move of simply being useful. When Tyrion asks, toward the end of it, what position remains available to him in a realm now formally reorganized around his family's reduced standing, the question is phrased as lightly as if he were inquiring about the wine, but the room knows what it is. Robert glances at Ned. Ned does not respond immediately, because immediately is not when he makes decisions of this kind. He lets the silence do its work. The letter from Tywin had confirmed the settlement's terms, had acknowledged receipt of the conditions, had done so in language so airless and formal that reading it felt like being inside a room where all the warmth had been deliberately removed. There was no gratitude in it, no relief. There was compliance, meticulous and legible, and behind the compliance, visible to anyone who knew how to read the space between formal words. There was something that was not defeat and was not acceptance. It was patience. The practiced architectural patience of a man who has survived longer than most of his enemies and intends to survive longer still, who understands that the board does not reset simply because one game has concluded, and who is already in the same moment that his ink dries on terms he did not choose, considering the shape of what comes next. Ned had read the letter twice, then set it face down on the table, and had not picked it up again. Now, in the solar, with Tyrion watching him from across the room, and Robert's mood hovering in the uneasy middle ground between resolution and restlessness, Ned finally speaks. He says that there is a position, that the realm has a need for sharp minds in difficult places, that a man who has just demonstrated a willingness to serve the truth at some personal cost to his family's pride might find in time that this court is not entirely closed to him. Tyrion's expression shifts almost imperceptibly. Not gratitude. Gratitude is too simple a word for what moves across his face. It is something closer to the recognition of a man who has placed a careful bet and is watching the first indication that the odds have moved in a direction he had not been entirely certain they would move. In time, Tyrion repeats. In time, Ned confirms. Outside the solar window, the city turns in its usual indifferent patterns. The commerce, the noise, the ordinary machinery of a capital that does not know and does not particularly care about the specific negotiations happening above it. But in the room, something has shifted. The settlement is real now in a way that letters and formal terms cannot quite make real, because Tyrion is here, and Tyrion is talking, and the Lannister voice in the room is no longer Cersei's fury or Tywin's cold correspondence, but this smaller, stranger, more complicated thing. A man who has decided for now that the future is more interesting than the grievance. Robert moves toward the door, then stops with his hand resting against the frame, looking back at neither of them in particular. He says that he wants a full accounting of the debts. The crown's debts. All of them. It is not what Ned expected him to say. He turns to look at Robert with something that might, in another context, be called hope. All of them, Robert says again, and the particular weight in his voice suggests that the wine he pushed aside the night before is still pushed aside, and that this is not a passing mood, but the beginning of something. A reckoning with the cost of a kingdom that has been running on borrowed gold and borrowed time in roughly equal measure. Tyrion, who knows more about those debts than almost anyone alive, says nothing, but he does not look away. The Raven had arrived 3 days before the trial. It had sat in a leather satchel on Ned's desk through all of it. Through the combat, through the throne room, through the long and fractured negotiation with Tyrion, through Robert's sudden and unexpected demand for a full accounting of the crown's debts. And now, with the capital settling into something that resembled, if not peace, then at least the temporary absence of open catastrophe, Ned places the letter on the table between them. Robert reads it slowly. This is itself unusual. Robert Baratheon is not a man who reads slowly. He is a man who skims dispatches and trusts his advisors to distill what matters, who treats written correspondence the way he treats formal ceremony, as a thing to be endured and abbreviated. But he reads this one slowly, and then he reads it again, and when he sets it down, his expression is not dismissal. Not yet. It is something closer to the particular blankness of a man who has encountered a thing he does not wish to be true. He says the boy is frightened, that the Night's Watch has been crying darkness from beyond the wall for 8,000 years, and the sun keeps rising. He says it not unkindly. He says it the way men say things they have already decided. Ned does not argue immediately. He lets the silence hold for a moment, the way a man lets a stone rest in his hand before placing it with precision on the exact square where it will do the most work. Then he says that Jon Snow is not a boy who frightens easily. He says it quietly. He says it with the weight of a father and the restraint of a man who has learned at considerable cost that the quiet voice carries further in a stone room than the loud one. Robert looks at him across the table. The window behind Ned shows the sky going gray with late afternoon, the kind of gray that settles over King's Landing in the colder months, a flat and textureless ceiling pressed down over the city's noise and smell and constant motion. Robert looks at that sky for a moment. Then he looks back at the letter. The thing about Ned Stark, Robert knows, is that he does not embellish. He does not soften or sharpen or shape. He reports. He has always reported. It was what made him valuable in the war, and what made him occasionally maddening in peacetime. This refusal to perform the information rather than simply deliver it. And so when Ned says the boy is not one who frightens easily, Robert hears it not as a father's pride, but as a lord's assessment. And the difference matters. He does not say yes, not at once. He says he wants to know what Sir Alliser Thorne has to say about it, and Ned tells him that Sir Alliser Thorne is part of why the letter was written, because Thorne has been treating the Watch's reports as the complaints of green recruits, rather than the intelligence of men positioned at the edge of the known world. Robert is quiet for a moment at that. Then he says that if he sends men to the wall, it cannot look like panic, that the court is already watching every decision he makes with the particular attention of people who have spent the last several weeks recalibrating their expectations, and that 200 soldiers riding north with a supply train behind them will be read by every lord in the 7 kingdoms as a signal, and the signal it sends matters as much as the soldiers themselves. Ned grants him this. It is a real concern, and dismissing it would be dishonest. So he frames it differently. He says it is not panic. He says it is the crown taking seriously what the crown has always said it takes seriously: the defense of the realm, the protection of the boundary that makes the kingdoms possible. He says 200 men and a supply train is not an army marching to meet a threat. It is a king remembering what the wall is for. Robert turns this over. He does not speak for long enough that the gray outside the window deepens by a shade. Then he says 200. And a meister, and grain enough for 2 winters on the assumption that the Night's Watch's own estimates are understated, which they generally are. He says it with the clipped efficiency of a man who spent years commanding, who knows that the difference between a decision and an order is the specificity of the follow-through. It is less than Ned hoped for. It is more than he feared. He nods once, and Robert nods once, and the thing is settled with the quiet economy of 2 men who have known each other long enough to dispense with ceremony when ceremony is not required. The Raven goes north 4 days later, tucked into the leather satchel of a royal courier, riding with the first section of the envoy. It reaches Castle Black ahead of the supply train by nearly 2 weeks, carried by a faster bird on the final leg, and it lands in the rookery on a morning so cold that the stone itself seems to exhale frost. Jon Snow does not read it in the rookery. He carries it up. He carries it all the way up to the top of the wall, to the great flat emptiness of the ice shelf above everything, where the wind comes out of the north without apology, and the world below is a distant suggestion. He reads it standing at the edge, looking out over the white and featureless dark of the land beyond, the haunted forest gone to silhouette and shadow, the sky above it a deep bruised black salted with cold stars. His father is alive. He exhales once, just once. The breath fogs and disperses and is gone, taken immediately by the wind, and Jon stands there with the letter in his hand and the wall beneath his boots and the darkness ahead of him vast and absolute and waiting. He does not allow himself more than that one breath of relief. There is a reason he came up here to read it, rather than reading it below in the warmth among the other men. He knew, some part of him knew, that whatever the letter contained, he would need to be alone with it first. That the feeling, whatever feeling it turned out to be, was a private thing before it could be anything else. He folds the letter carefully and presses it inside his cloak, against his chest, where the cold is slightly less. Below, somewhere in the yards, a horn sounds. One blast, single and clear, the signal for a ranging party returning. Jon turns back from the edge. He looks north one more moment longer than he needs to. The darkness does not shift. The darkness does not answer. But somewhere out there in the endless cold, something is moving, and the letter folded against his heart, and the 200 soldiers riding north, and all the careful politics of a capital newly steadied. None of it has reached whatever is moving yet, and the distance between here and there is closing in a direction only one side fully understands. Jon pulls his cloak tighter and starts back toward the stairs. The throne room of the Red Keep holds its breath in a particular way when something irrevocable is about to happen. The pillars seem to lean inward. The light through the high narrow windows falls in columns that catch the dust stirred by hundreds of assembled courtiers, all of them understanding, in that instinctive animal way that courts develop over generations, that today is not a ceremonial occasion dressed as ceremony. Today is history dressed as ceremony, which is a different thing entirely. Stannis Baratheon walks the length of the throne room the way a man walks to a thing he has long been owed and has long since stopped expecting. His cloak is gray and gold. His jaw is set. His eyes move neither left nor right, which is itself a form of statement. He does not need to read the room, because the room does not factor into his calculations. The Iron Throne sits at the far end of its dais, ugly and brutal and enormous in the particular way that monuments to power always are, and Robert sits upon it, looking flushed and solemn in equal measure, which, for Robert, is a significant expenditure of solemnity. The proclamation is read aloud by the Grand Maester in his careful, deliberate voice, each word placed with the precision of a man who understands that what is spoken in this room today will be copied into records and carried by ravens and repeated for decades. Stannis Baratheon, Lord of Dragonstone, is named heir to the Iron Throne. The succession is formal. It is legal. It is witnessed by lords and maesters and septons and the full apparatus of a realm making itself official. Stannis receives it with a bow that is exactly as stiff as everyone present expected, exactly as correct in its angles and its duration. And when he straightens, he does not smile, because Stannis does not smile at things he considers merely accurate. From the gallery above, Renly watches. He stands with his hands resting lightly on the carved stone railing, his expression composed in the particular way that beautiful, charming people learn to compose themselves when they are concealing something they understand they cannot afford to display. What he feels, watching his brother receive what Renly has always privately believed should be navigated rather than simply inherited. That feeling belongs to him alone, folded away behind the easy grace he wears like armor. He watches Stannis bow. He watches Robert nod. He says nothing and smiles at the person standing nearest to him, because that is what Renly does, and because sometimes the most dangerous thing a man can do is smile at exactly the right moment. Ned Stark stands to the right of the throne. He is confirmed afterward. The second part of the day's business, less dramatic in its staging, but in many ways more consequential in its meaning. Hand of the King, the title he came south with, the title that nearly cost him everything, the title he now accepts again, with the full weight of what he has learned pressing against the inside of his chest. He does not take it lightly this time. He took it lightly the first time, or not lightly exactly, but dutifully, as a man honors a debt to an old friend. He takes it this time as a man who has stood in the eyrie and in the dungeons beneath it, and has understood what happens to realms when hands fail and kings stop listening and the machinery of governance rusts through for want of anyone willing to do the grinding and unglamorous work of maintaining it. He has extracted promises. That word, extracted, is the precise one, because Robert does not give promises freely, and Ned did not simply ask. He asked, and Robert deflected, and Ned asked again, and Robert said there was time enough for all of that, and Ned said quietly that there was not. And something in the quality of that quiet pressed Robert into something he does not often occupy, which is seriousness. The gold cloaks, the debts owed to the Iron Bank, which compound with a patience that outlasts kings. The Night's Watch, which holds its castles with fewer and fewer men each year, writing letters south that get read politely and answered with sympathy and nothing else. Robert heard all of it. Robert said yes to all of it, which does not mean Robert will remember all of it. But the agreement was made before witnesses, and Ned is the kind of man who keeps lists, and the kind of man who keeps lists is exactly what a king who forgets his promises most needs standing beside him. The girls leave King's Landing 2 days after the court ceremony, before the capital has finished processing the succession announcement, while the taverns still argue about it and the lords still send carefully worded letters to each other, establishing where everyone stands. Sansa rides out in the early morning when the light is still gray and thin, seated straight in her saddle in the way she was trained, carrying herself with a composure that did not exist in her when she rode south months ago. What she carries south with her is not innocence rearranged. It is something that replaced innocence, something with harder edges and a longer memory. She looks at the gates of King's Landing as she passes through them. She does not look back. Arya rides beside her for a while and then pushes her horse slightly forward, which is simply what Arya does. Needle hangs at her hip where everyone can see it. She is not performing anything by wearing it there. She simply will not put it somewhere it cannot be reached. She has not told anyone about the names she turns over in her mind when she cannot sleep. The names attached to faces, the faces attached to moments she has not yet found the shape of. She does not know yet what the names are for. She knows only that she is keeping them. The escort is 40 riders, armed and well provisioned, with orders that leave no room for interpretation. They ride north along the King's Road, which stretches ahead of them through the riverlands in the long dusty miles that separate the capital from anything that feels like home. The riders settle into the rhythms of a long journey. The horses find their pace. Somewhere behind them in the capital, Stannis Baratheon stands in a chamber he has been given at Dragonstone's equivalent in political proximity, and reads a report about the financial state of the Seven Kingdoms with an expression that is not surprise. It is something worse than surprise. It is recognition. He has suspected the numbers for years. He has asked for accounting and received delays. He has the accounting now, all of it, laid out in the careful hand of a Meister who apparently understood that the new heir would not accept the softened version. The debts are significant. The word significant is doing considerable work in that sentence, and Stannis knows it. And he sets the parchment down on the table and looks at it for a long moment. before picking it up again, because some numbers require being looked at twice before the mind accepts them as real. He will need to speak with the hand about this. He will need to speak with the hand about this soon, before Robert has the opportunity to be cheerful about it. Time moves differently when the worst does not happen. It does not accelerate with relief or slow with gratitude. It simply continues, steady and unremarkable, the way a river continues after the stone that might have dammed it is moved aside before it could fall. 2 years pass in the way that good years tend to pass, not with great drama, not with the kind of events that fill the songs of wandering singers or the histories of archmasters with breathless prose, but with the quieter, more difficult work of a realm learning, however imperfectly, to hold itself together. Robert Baratheon sits in small council meetings with a regularity that astonishes the men around the table. He is not a changed man in the way that stories demand men change, sudden, complete, luminous, with new purpose. He is still Robert. He still laughs too loudly and remembers old battles more fondly than old policies. He still reaches for the wine more often than his Meister would prefer, but he reaches for it less than he did before. He hunts, but he returns. He feasts, but he governs. He keeps Ned close in the way that men who have nearly lost something keep it close afterward, not with sentimentality, but with a quiet, gruff attention, the way a man might keep a candle burning in a window, not because he thinks about it, but because he cannot quite bring himself to let it go dark. The small council watches this and does not comment on it directly. They do not need to. The results are visible in the ledgers, in the dispatches, in the slow grinding work of a kingdom that is being, if not perfectly administered, then at least attended to. Stannis Baratheon attends to his own preparations with the methodical patience that has always defined him. He does not relax into the position of heir. He studies it. He reads every accounting, every census, every report on the state of the grain stores in the Reach, and the fishing yields along the eastern coast, and the condition of the roads in the Riverlands. He prepares the way a man prepares for a siege, not with enthusiasm, but with the cold and total commitment of someone who understands that thoroughness is the only thing standing between a kingdom and catastrophe. He will not be his brother. He has never wanted to be his brother. He will be something else entirely, harder in some ways, more honest in most, and quietly, implacably capable in the ways that matter when the singing stops and the accounting begins. Across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen watches her 3 small dragons grow. They are not large yet. They are not the world-ending things they will perhaps one day become. They are strange and beautiful, and they breathe fire in short, startling bursts that still make her laugh sometimes despite everything, despite the grief and the wandering and the years of surviving in the spaces between what she lost and what she might yet become. The realm across the water watches her the way a man watches a distant fire on a hillside, with caution, with awareness, not yet with panic. She is real. She is a rumor with teeth and wings and ancient blood behind it. What that means for Westeros is a question that no one in the small council has fully answered, because the full answer lies in a future that has not yet arrived. The journey north takes Ned home. The word does not diminish with use. Home. It sits in the chest differently in the north than it does anywhere south of the neck. Heavier and cleaner at once, like cold water drawn from a deep well. He rides through the gates of Winterfell and feels the stone of it, the permanence of it. The way it does not need to announce itself because it simply is what it is and has always been. Catelyn meets him in the yard. There are words, but they are not the important part. The important part is the moment before the words, when she looks at him, and he looks at her, and the months of separation and worry, and the memory of that courtyard in King's Landing, where everything nearly ended simply, settles. Does not vanish, settles. Bran walks with a slight difficulty now, a careful and deliberate placing of each step. But he walks, and he thinks with a depth that quietly startles the Meisters who teach him. And he looks at the world from angles that no one else quite notices. He will be something unusual, Ned thinks, watching him. Something the Stark line has not yet produced, though it is too early yet to name the shape of it. Rickon has grown in the way that young children grow during a father's absence, in sudden, almost accusatory inches, as though the body is pointing out what time was lost. And Robb. Robb stands in the training yard, and Ned watches him and sees not himself exactly, not a copy, but something better, the best of what a Stark can be when the years are not too cruel too soon. In the Godswood, beneath the heart tree with its carved face and its red leaves falling in the early cold, Ned kneels in the soft, dark earth and breathes. The air is clean in the way that only northern air is clean, carrying ice in it still even at the edge of autumn, carrying the smell of pine and deep water and stone. He does not ask for anything. He has learned over a long life of asking the old gods for guidance in dark moments, that what they give is not answers, but presence. The sense of being held within something vast and ancient and indifferent to the smallness of any single life's ambitions. He kneels and breathes and feels, settling through him slowly like warmth after cold, the quiet and unfamiliar sensation of having done right. Not perfectly, not without cost, but right in the ways that matter most, for the people he loves most. It is enough. It is more than enough. When Robert comes north to visit, as Robert does with an enthusiasm that surprises everyone, including himself, they stand together on the walls of Winterfell as fresh snow begins to fall. It comes softly, without wind, the way the best snow falls, each flake unhurried, as though the sky has all the time in the world. Robert stands with his great hands on the parapet and looks north, and the north goes on, gray and white and immense, toward the distant dark line of the wall that is just barely visible on the clearest days, a shadow at the edge of the world. He thinks about what he did, the decision in that throne room, the gauntlet throne, the old instinct rising in him like something remembered from before the throne changed him. He thinks about the shape of that moment and what would have lived in its place if he had not made it. A trial, a predetermined verdict, a headsman's axe descending on the neck of the truest man he has ever known, a realm cracking along every fault line that already ran through it, crack by crack by crack, until the pieces fell apart and nothing was there to hold them together when the cold came down from the north. He does not say all of this aloud. He does not need to. Ned stands beside him in the falling snow, and the silence holds everything that does not need to be spoken. The darkness beyond the wall is still there. It has always been there. It waits with the patience of something that has no concept of waiting, because it has no concept of time at all. Whatever it is that stirs in that cold and ancient dark, it stirs still, and it will not stop stirring, because two men chose to do right by each other in a room in the south. But Westeros is still whole. Its lords are not yet at each other's throats. its king still has a hand he trusts, and a brother who will not undo everything after him, and a realm that is, despite its debts and its grudges and its thousand small corruptions, still capable of holding together when the cold comes. The snow falls on Winterfell. It falls in the Godswood and the training yard and the smoke rising from the great hall below. It falls on the wall far to the north, silent and accumulating on ancient ice. It falls on the king and his hand, standing shoulder to shoulder above the world they have, between them, managed not to destroy. Whatever comes next, they will face it together, and the realm will face it whole. And this brings us to the end of this alternate history. If you enjoyed exploring how events might have unfolded differently, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. We dive into new stories from the world of Westeros every single day, imagining the choices, battles, alliances, and destinies that could have completely changed the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. What do you think would have happened next? Did this version of history end better than the original? Or would you have taken the story in a completely different direction? Leave your ideas in the comments, because many of the best future stories come directly from your suggestions. Thank you so much for watching and for spending your time with me. I'll see you tomorrow with another alternate history from Westeros. Until then, peace out.